First of all, I didn't realize I needed to wear a costume, so I apologize. I just wore standard dress. And I will be attentive to the time because I'm presuming by 8 o'clock everybody wants to be home to get their weekly installment from Fox TV of the show The Exorcist. Anybody watching The Exorcist? A few of you, come on, you don't have to be ashamed. It's not we're not going to ostracize you or anything like that. So a few people are watching the show? Yeah, a few. Okay, all right. Anybody watching Lucifer on Monday nights see, we got some Lucifer folks. All right. Okay, well, it's a cross-section of folks. This is, I can stand in an extra room and be heard. This is kind of nice. Practically speaking, we've got a small window of time to cover a semester's worth of work. To be honest, I mean, and to just be realistic. And let me begin by saying, I'm not here to make a case for the devil, or whoever you want to call him, Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, Asmodeus, there's tons of names. More times than not, I'll simply refer to him as the evil one, because there's a variant translation of the Lord's Prayer. Most of us are familiar with the one, and deliver us from evil, period, and amen. But there's a variant translation that says, and deliver us from the evil one. And it's much more succinct and, in a sense, much more realistic of what we're going to be talking about this evening. And so, again, not here to make a case. If you're Catholic, the easiest is to go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, look up numbers 391 to 395. That, in a nutshell, is the Church's understanding of the Catholic, of the devil, of the evil one. Of course, I'm going to speak from the perspective of the Catholic Church because, surprise, I'm a priest. So you would expect that. And with no deference to other faith traditions, different people, it feels like it's getting louder, different people, different traditions have different understandings of the ancient battle of good and evil, of how they deal with cosmic forces and all of those different kinds of things. I'm coming at it from the perspective of the understanding of the Catholic Church. I'm starting from the perspective or the understanding that the devil is, in Catholic understanding, a part of the landscape. And so I want to talk about the reality of that. And so basically I want to try and do it in 3 movements over the course of the next hour. The first would be just simply to know the tradition, just a little bit about our Catholic tradition with regards to the understanding of who the evil one is. Second, to know, in a sense, how he works, how the evil one works in real time. And then thirdly, in a sense, how do I respond? How do I live it? How do I live in light of something that is malevolent, that is at work in human history and in people's lives in a real way? But however I'm going to talk, in whatever ways, whatever descriptions I use, I'm always going to bring you back to Christ. That's always, for the Christian, for the Catholic, that has to be our center, that has to be our focus, is Jesus Christ. Because if we are in Relationship with the Christ, we don't have anything to worry about when push comes to shove. When God, when Jesus, when we're centered in the truth, in the person of Jesus Christ, it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It doesn't mean that everything in my life is going to be perfect. I'm going to be free from problems. I'm going to be free from illness. I'm going to have all the money I need, all the success I want, all that kind of stuff. I wish, but that's just not reality. But we live with our minds and our hearts focused on the eternal, with minds and hearts set on who God is. So a couple of just, in an effort to speak a bit about the evil one in real time, at least as far as tradition goes, I made reference a few moments ago to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. If you look at those numbers, 391 to 395, it encapsulates, in a sense, of the origin of and how the evil one works. And in 391, paragraph 391, it talks about our first parents, Adam and Eve. the sense of tradition going back to the Genesis story. And we know that it started good, but didn't end so good, right? I mean, we found our parents, our first parents, Adam and Eve, in paradise. They were already living there. They knew what life was in paradise. That's where God planted them, so to speak, after he created them, in a perfect state of happiness. But then at some point, the serpent enters the picture, and the blame game enters the picture, as it always does. And in number 391 of the Catechism, it talks about a seductive voice. Just one of any number of buzzwords I'm going to use to, in a sense, say this is how evil works in a person's life. It's a seductive voice. What happens? Go on. It's just a piece of fruit. Go on. What's it gonna do? Go on, eat it. What? Die? You're not gonna die. You're gonna become like God. Story in Genesis. You can read it yourself. A seductive voice. One of the faces of the reality of evil. Scripture. Look at John's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 44. Nowhere in Scripture is there a physical description of what the evil one looks like. But throughout Scripture, there are images and understandings and snippets of how the evil one functions. Perhaps one of the best is John 8, verse 44. He's a murderer from the beginning. Well, let's go back to Eden. As a result of the eating of the fruit, what happened? What entered the world? And? Yeah, sin and then death. He's a murderer from the beginning, going back to Adam and Eve. And far worse, though, than that, on another level, is that he is not just somebody that can kill the body as a result of that original fall, that original sin, we all die, okay. But for those who believe that there is a spiritual component to us, soul, spirit, which lives on, if a person is enraptured in a relationship with the evil one, it's not only a death of the physical, it can be an eternal death to the spiritual. So he's a murderer from the beginning. Then that verse goes on in John 8:44. It talks about that he's a liar and the father of lies. Powerful image, practical description of how he functions. He's a liar. There's no truth. And so there's always the distortion that's going on. There's always a distorted presence, a distorted manifestation, a distorted look. That's John chapter 8. We look at our Holy Father, Pope Francis. People are befuddled from the time that he was elected Pope. He would always make reference to the devil. You know, they thought, and the poor media, well, the media is still trying to figure out what to do with Pope Francis. But, you know, in a sense, he's kind of growing on them, and they're kind of getting somewhat of a handle on him, and then he does something else. But he was always regularly, and he still does, he talks about the devil. Is he fixated on the devil? Not at all. For him, as part of our Catholic tradition, the evil one's a player. He's part of the landscape. Nothing new. This is as old as time. Nothing I'm telling you tonight should in any way be a surprise, because this is a reality that's been going on since, what, day 2? Day 3? Yeah, this is an old story. Dress it up. Put different faces on it, however you want to do it, but if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's still a duck. And so this ancient animosity, if you will, is this ancient struggle. And so Pope Francis regularly talks about the evil one and the devil, and he's just part of the landscape. He's part of life. Do we get fixated? Do we get overwhelmed? Do we get overcome by it all? No, because we've got Jesus Christ. We always begin and end with Jesus Christ. This morning when we got up, at least my understanding is that God was in charge. when we put our heads on our pillow tonight after this wild, raucous Halloween party that's going to be happening tonight here, God's still going to be in charge, right? If he's not, then he's not God. If there's something else that has sway over that, then God is not God. The evil one's a player. He's a creature. He has a beginning. There is only one God. He created. Out of love, God created. He created a world of spirits first. And we, like them, were given free will to choose. Some of the angels chose not to serve because they didn't like the plan. And so the breach. What happened on earth happened in heaven. The reality of free will, of, in a sense, disobedience within creation. All part of the tradition. Another image, practical kind of image in the sense of how the evil one works. On November 15th, 1972, most of you probably weren't even born, right? How many of you were born after 1972? Oh my God. I am getting old. Getting older. Anyway, for a series of Wednesdays, he's now Blessed Paul VI, was doing what popes usually do on Wednesdays. Oftentimes they give a Wednesday audience, and so they have a gathering, St. Peter's Square or the audience hall, and they give a presentation on something, some theme. So late September, throughout October, early November, Blessed Paul VI was parsing the Lord's Prayer. And each week he would take just a segment. First week, Our Father. Second week, Who art in heaven, so forth and so forth and so on. He finally comes to November 15th, 1972, and he gets to the phrase, and deliver us from evil. Allow me just two little excerpts from that Wednesday audience. He begins by saying, what are the church's greatest needs at the present time? November 15th, 1972. Don't be surprised at our answer, and don't write it off as simplistic or even superstitious. One of the church's greatest needs is to be defended against the evil we call the devil. He goes on to say, we come face to face with sin, which is a perversion of human freedom. Somehow we always have it in our minds that, I can sin. We have free will. We can do any bloody thing we want to. And that somehow that's a freeing thing. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do whatever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want, with whomever I want, because I'm free. I can do that. Even if it's sinful, and who cares? It makes me free. But the reality is, sin is not a freeing action, it's a binding action. It's constrictive. It takes life from us in the sense, spiritually speaking, because it breaks down our relationship with God. And that's a word you're going to hear me, by the time we get done I get done talking tonight, I'm going to say the word relationship, and you're going to twitch just like one of Pavlov's dogs, or maybe start salivating. Use that image again and again and again of a relationship. Because when push comes to shove, we're either in relationship with God, higher power, however you want to describe that, or we're in relationship with something else. And we'll spend some time talking about other things that we have the potential of being in relationship with. So Paul VI is talking about sin, about a perversion of human freedom. But interestingly, he goes on to say that, and then sin in its turn becomes the occasion and the effect of an interference. Again, just another image to keep in mind. Seductive voice, interference, those same kinds of things, deception, lie. It's, in a sense, a way of acting, a way of being in the world and in relationship with others, and how things become distorted or corrupted. And so that's what Paul VI is saying. By an interference in us and in our world, by a dark, hostile agent, the devil. He says, evil is not merely an absence of something, but an active force. A living spiritual being that is perverted and that perverts others. And that's not our experience in the world today, because that's what we've lost. No one in their right mind is going to argue if you say, yeah, evil exists. And say, yeah, there's a revelation. Look at what's happening in pick a part of the world, any country, the violence that's taking place. Look at our city streets in Chicago. Look at the weekly tally on Monday mornings of how many, made it and how many didn't make it. Look at the violence that happens in families, the violence, the abuse. So many different ways that people are used and abused. This is not a good or a healthy or a holy thing. It's destructive because it touches the integrity of the person, the goodness of the person, and tears them down. Yeah, evil exists. No one's going to argue. And usually people respond by saying, and somebody should do something about that. Somebody should fix that. Somebody else. Because what we've lost is Paul VI's understanding that it's a personal reality. It's a personal thing, that we're affected by the darkness personally. It's not just something, this amorphous cloud, kind of like the cloud where we send all our technology to and stuff, wherever the heck that is. Evil is out there just kind of boom, 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 knocking around and knocking people over, and again, something that somebody should do something about. The reality is that evil, as opposed to good, it touches us. Confronts us, can become a part of our life if we open the door to it. And so that's, in a sense, the segue I want to take now, in a sense of you saying, okay, I'm trying to, for the most part, most days, I would lead a pretty decent life, for the person that's wanting to be in relationship with God, what do you do just to keep you alive? What are the things people do to be in relationship with God? Anybody? Pray. What else? Go to church. What else? Go to confession. What else? Read the Bible. What else?
Receive the sacraments.
Receive the sacraments, fast, do good works, all kinds of things. What's the hope and goal? Yeah. For you, however you want to say it, heaven, paradise, union with God, the good, whatever the case may be. But there are options, as always, because of free will, to choose to open a doorway to something else. Key thing in a lot of people's misunderstandings is that somehow the evil one, the devil, can just kind of set his sights on somebody and say, hey, you look like a good guy. I'm going to attach myself to you. I'm just going to take you over. I'm going to possess you. It doesn't work that way. I don't mean to disappoint lots of people. I don't, in a sense, so many books written, so much in the media, so many movies. It's not, at least it's not been from my experience what I've seen. There has to be an entree. There has to be an opening. The person has to open themselves up to the darkness. They have to engage. The only person that swings the door to me is me. And the same is true for you. So in a sense of what do we open ourselves up to? Do we open ourselves up to the divine, to the good? Or are things going on in our lives, or have they gone on in our lives, where we open ourselves to other things? I want to share briefly with you 4 of the probably most common doorways, if you will. And let me be clear, in each of these, it's not the presumption that, oh, okay, I do this or I do that, I open this doorway, I'm going to be possessed by the devil. No. It's a condition for the possibility. What happens when you open a door? Something can walk in, right? Something can enter. If the door is closed, it takes some effort. If the door is locked, if it's sealed, there's no easy entry. But for the person who opens the doorway, then something can develop. And again, please bear in mind that these are not guaranteed situations where, in a sense, the evil one is going to enter a person's life. Just my own experience. the most common doorways that possibly lead into some kind of relationship with the evil one, with darkness. The first two should be no surprise. First is a pattern of sin. So I mean, in a sense of I'm doing something that is breaking down my relationship with God. Maybe I had a relationship with God once. Maybe it was pretty good. Maybe it was all very, I mean, in a sense, was detailed, was profound, wonderful kinds of things. But then something entered the picture, a particular pattern of sin. And, choose your favorite sin. We all have them. But, how do we normally remedy that? At least, and again, I can only speak for the Catholic tradition, is for a person who falls into a pattern of sin, you respond, you heal sin, you heal the rupture of a relationship with God through the sacrament of penance. If it's venial sin, through the reception of Holy Communion. And that healing takes place. But what happens if I make a conscious choice for the sin and not for God? Again, there's the reality that a breakdown of relationship can take place with the divine, and in a sense it can be a point of entry for the darkness. The second is occult, direct occult involvement, and I mean, it's, no pun intended, legion, in a sense of the ways that people engage the occult. And, in so many ways, people think, oh my God, it's 2016, who goes to a healer to, in a sense, have some kind of illness taken off them? Or who goes to a brujo, a witch, or a warlock, to have a magic or a curse cast? Or who goes to a curandero, a healer, a santero, that is going to bring healing into my life and fix everything, all those kinds of things. And there's so many other forms. Each culture, pick a country. I mean, you look at Africa, you can look at throughout Mexico, Central South America, you can look at Haiti, you can look at Eastern Europe. Each place has its own unique forms of magic, of involvements and healings, all different kinds of things that don't have an origin in God. You say, well, come on, it's 2016. I mean, we were educated. This is an institution of higher learning. I mean, who puts their belief or thought or desire in those kinds of things? I hate to tell you, a lot of people do. And it happens right here in Chicago. It happens right here in this neighborhood, I hate to tell you. I mean, and there's so many images, so many stories they could share, Practically speaking, 8 months ago, Chicago firefighter called me. I knew the man, just as simply as I seemed a good, solid, run-of-the-mill, beer-drinking, partying kind of, guy. And one Monday morning, he called me in a sheer panic. In fact, he had left a voicemail message for me before I even got to the office. And I got to see you, I got to see you, I got to see you, I got to see you. And so I finally was able to reach him, and I said, well, today's kind of crazy, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. I got to see you now. I'll come at lunchtime, I'll come at any moment. And I could tell, I mean, it wasn't just a whimsical kind of thing. I mean, he was scared. So he set the time, he came. We needed to share what had happened the Saturday before. Saturday night, south side of the city here, called to a fire. He's a fireman, right? And 3 flat. The first floor was a storefront, and then a second floor and third floor apartments. People in the second and third floor were experiencing smoke was coming up from somewhere. It was about 10:30 at night. So put on the gear, put on the oxygen mask, all that kind of stuff, because you couldn't even see into the storefront. Broke in, covered the entire first floor. Nothing, no sign of fire, but lots and lots and lots of intense smoke, foul-smelling smoke. And so they go down the basement. He could only see against a wall just simply there was, because of the density of the smoke and that just something red emanating, in the sense of flame, fire, something. And so he just started breaking it down. He and another guy started breaking it down with their boots and then just hosing it down and stuff like that. And finished, out the door they went. He didn't realize until he got outside that his boots were covered with blood. And so, long story short, homicide was called. They investigate. When the smoke clears, so to speak, a series of 5 clay pots, which contain blood, chicken bones, animal entrails, intestines and things, and a human head. The storefront was a botanica. And a botanica in lots of Hispanic circles is, in most places it's just a natural herb. You get teas, oils, basic kinds of health, kind of a version of a health food store. And that's what a lot of them are. Sell candles, sell all kinds of things. But there are some botanicas that have a back room or a downstairs room where all kinds of things are cast or worked. People who believe in Satanism, satanic ritual, and magic and the like, and do all kinds of things. And it's not, I don't mean to shock or scandalize anybody. This is not an exceptional kind of thing. In 2003, January, I was just back from doctoral studies. I was dutifully sitting in my desk at the office downtown in the Chancery, and phone rings. Man on the other end of the line identifies himself as a cold case detective. You're thinking, okay, I don't remember anything. Why? I always tried to lead a pretty good life. And 2 cold case detectives from Toledo, Ohio. They were reopening a homicide case from 1980 of a religious sister, Sister Margaret Ann Paul, who was one of the sisters who staffed a Catholic hospital in Toledo, Ohio. At some point on the Saturday before Easter in 1980, Sister Margaret Ann Paul, while she was decorating the chapel there for Easter, someone entered the chapel, overtook her, took her into the sacristy of the chapel, the sacristy of the chapel, strangled her to the point of unconsciousness, because if you're going to have a sacrifice, the blood has to be flowing, remember. Then took a sharp object, folded the altar cloth that she was using to dress the altar with, folded it in half, placed it over the upper part of her body, and then used that sharp object and stabbed an inverted cross 31 times into the upper portion of her body, so that the cross was inverted, so the cross beam was towards the lower part of her chest, and the vertical beam was, more of it was facing up towards her shoulder. After the stabbing of 31 times, the person pooled the blood, signed her forehead with her own blood in a kind of mock anointing. They hiked up her habit, they lowered her foundation garments, they penetrated her with something, and all of this took place before the Blessed Sacrament. Satanic ritual. It's been written about, there's stories about it, and all that kind of stuff. Push comes to shove, what prompted the call that I received in January of 2003 was in the summer of 2002, the cold case detectives got this absolutely, what they thought, whacked out, bizarre letter from a woman who they thought was nuts, because she talked about child sacrifice. She talked about a place out in the country, the basement of a barn, where all kinds of unspeakable things were done. She spoke about local authorities, police, a doctor who had a pediatrician who had access to an orphanage, all kinds of things. But interestingly, in the course of that letter, she mentioned 2 priests, Roman Catholic priests, by name, one of whom was the chaplain of the Catholic hospital in Toledo, Ohio. This is what prompted the opening of the Cole case. Move the story forward, 2006, Father Gerald Robinson, the Catholic priest chaplain of that hospital, was convicted of the satanic ritual murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul. The man was completely sane. He was tested. I mean, in a sense, he was evaluated just as sound as, well, most of us probably. And, you know, to add insult to injury, he had said her funeral mass. Say, how did that happen? How did we get there? It's an extreme case, and I apologize for the graphic nature of it. But that's just one case. That's just a reality, in a sense of how deceived, how tricked, how confused the mind can become. Here's a man who was standing with one foot at the altar, offering one kind of sacrifice as a Catholic priest, the sacrifice of the Mass. And he was in that sacristy of the chapel in that hospital offering a very different kind of sacrifice. And so, you know, again, it's an extreme thing, but there are so many different types of occult things that are very real. And you look at the world in which we live, the fixation, the fascination, just even in programming. I mean, in a sense, I don't know how they could fit one more even evening program on, you know, be it with vampires, zombies, you know, The Walking, whatever, you know, or paranormal shows, ghost hunters, all of those different types of things. In and of themselves, individually, I grew up watching that kind of stuff. I mean, as a kid, I was 13 years old when I went to see The Exorcist, when it originally came out. Those types, that was just part of, I didn't think nothing of it, but there's within our society a fixation, a fascination with occult things. And what happens too is when it becomes pervasive, people lose the edge, in a sense, of the dark side of it. And I'm not an extremist by any means, in a sense, because in all of these things you have to keep a healthy balance, you know? In a sense, again, I go back to the same thing I started with. If a person is focused in their relationship with God, it's a healthy relationship with God, you've got nothing to worry about. Does that mean that, again, you're not going to brush up against the darkness? We all brush up against the darkness, whether we realize it or not. But if we're inclined to the good, if we're focused on the divine, it just is that. There's a brushing up against. But if we intentionally open ourselves up, first two examples or first two categories, be it a pattern of sin, be it the occult itself, then things can happen because it's a direct invitation. Third category is two different items within it. One is trauma, the other is abuse. Let me differentiate. Trauma. I happen upon something horrific, some incredible event in a negative way. In a sense, a homicide, a suicide, I witness, even just a horrific accident, something on the highway, whatever the case may be, something that truly traumatizes me. That's the one category. The other is abuse, something that I experience that's done to me. And across the board, physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the case may be. In either category, the hope is that the person will get the healing. That is intentionally, because every time I bump this thing, never mind. The hope is that I'm going to move towards healing, right? In a sense, supportive healing, counseling, therapy, spiritual direction, whatever, in a sense, to address and to heal the whole person. But what happens if I don't? Again, is this a guarantee that I'm going to be somehow demonically afflicted? No. But if I get caught in a whole world of negative emotions, Anger, resentment, rage, bitterness, retaliation, a whole list of kinds of things. It happens within family structures. Because of things that happen within families. You don't have to go down the street. You don't have to go anywhere else. You see the kind of spousal abuse, different kinds of horrific things that happen within family structures. And there's a whole lot of kinds of other places where these things happen. But if I get caught, if I get enmeshed in that whole realm of negative emotions, and I live there, again, is this a guarantee that the evil one's going to be knocking at my door? No. Does it create a fertile seedbed? Yes, it does. Because in a sense, I become stuck. I stop living. It very much becomes a very downward spiral. If healing, if hope, if restoration does not somehow begin, it's a possibility. The fourth, and somewhat akin to the third, is unforgiveness. But it plays a big part in lots of people's lives, the inability to forgive. People get caught, people get trapped in a whole range of things, whatever something was done to them. And again, it can be horrific. I'm not trying to in any way diminish it. But it's what I do with the feelings. What do I do with, am I going to hold on? Because somehow, maybe it's part of our human condition, we become fascinated at times. We can. To hold on to a grudge, something that, there's somehow this twisted sense of pleasure that maybe the day will come and I'll be able to get my pound of flesh. I'll be able to even the score. I'll be able to whatever. And, the kicker is, more times than not, the person that was the offender, the abuser, whatever it was that, in a sense, we need to move beyond, they don't even think about us. That's the real kicker. But the person that is in that stuck space stops living. Silly little image, but it works for me. If you come down to my office at the Quigley Center, walk around, you'd expect to see all the things you'd expect for in a priest's office working in the chancery. And I got an image of the crucified on the wall. I've got a lovely statue of the Blessed Mother, other kinds of things around. On my desk, I've got a statue, a figurine that stands about this big of Jacob Marley. Remember Jacob Marley? Christmas Carol? Jacob Marley was the precursor to the three ghosts of past, present, and future. And there's Jacob, little guy. Jim Shore is the artist. He does all kinds of great things. And there's Jacob Marley standing there looking me in the face every day. And he's got his little gray suit on. And he's got a towel tied around his head to keep his mouth shut, as they did in death in those time at that era in history. But he's covered with chains bound all over. And if you've seen any versions of it, if you read the book or if you've seen any of the movies, he comes shackled in chains. And the three little words at the bottom of the statue, link by link. For me, at least, and again, bear with me, but it's my mirror on a daily basis. I look at Jacob Marley and I think about all the crap that I can carry around with me from the past. Angers, resentments, rage, grudges, and on and on and on. No one is holding a gun to my head saying, Jeffrey, you've got to keep those things alive. You've got to drag them along with you. They are meant to make you miserable throughout your life. You deserve to be miserable because you're just a miserable lout, so forth and so on. No, it's a choice. I choose whether to seek and to move into healing or not. And whatever it is, whatever the healing that's needed, do it to move beyond the unforgiveness, to move beyond the stuck place. It's a practical kind of thing because the evil one is practical in how he works. Very few people get the big, the movies, with Linda Blair doing the spider walk down the stairs and the swiveling head going around and cans of green pea soup everywhere. Do those things happen? Some do. But I'll tell you why those things happen. 2 reasons. The evil one's 2 favorite tools are fear and isolation. Fear. He can do that. He's a thug. He really is. The evil one is a thug. What can you do? If I can flicker the lights on and off, if I can move that speaker, if that speaker moves from that corner over to there without no one moving it, if all of a sudden the temperature gets down to 30 degrees in one spot, so forth and so on. Things happen, the TV's playing without it being plugged into the electrical socket, whatever the case may be. What does that do? It doesn't make you feel all warm and fuzzy, does it? Not usually. Because what does it do? It instills fear. When a person is in a vexed, a fearful place, they're not centered. It's the nature of the evil one. The evil one wants to off-center us. If I'm focused on God, I have got nothing to worry about. Does that mean that there's still not darkness around me in the world? It is what it is, but my orientation is clear. Fear disorients. Fear takes us off our center and undermines us. First is fear. Second is isolation. It's the nature of the evil one to break down relationships, to break down, you see it happen, you can see it happen in families of all various levels, within relationships, all different types of things. Am I saying that every broken family is because of the result of the evil one? No. But does the evil one ply his tricks, in a sense, to isolate people? Absolutely. To break down the relationships, the supports, the consolations, the comforts, in order to distract and to get us basically backed into a corner. It's just the nature of how the evil one works. So these are tangible kinds of things, practical kinds of things, because many people have the Hollywood version, of all of these different types of things. Folks that'll be home at 8 o'clock tonight watching The Exorcist, and you've got the young exorcist that's learning from the older guy that, it's kind of like the original movie, The Exorcist, the same kind of image, where they, this little Reagan, the girl, is doing all these wacky things after playing with a Ouija board. And they come and grab this crusty old Jesuit out of some archaeological dig somewhere in the Middle East, and they parachute him, into the middle of Georgetown, to fix this problem. And the poor old codger tips over and dies right at the bedside of the girl, and the young priest has to solve the issues. More times than not, it's not that, in a sense, wacky, if you will, or that extreme. It's much more of a personal kind of thing because it's about relationships. Again, sorry for keep coming back to that reality, but that's what it is. I'm going to name it for what it is. Because the majority of people I see, they don't need an exorcist. I would say 85% of the people I see don't need an exorcist. They need a parish priest, a spiritual director, a counselor, somebody in a sense to ground them. Has something gone in their life, something quite probably has gone on in their life. Perhaps they've opened themselves up to the darkness. But it's a matter of looking at the whole person. The exorcist is trained as a skeptic. The presumption is that there is some natural, organic explanation for what's going on. Is it a mental health issue? Schizophrenia, bipolar, dissociative identity disorder, and so forth and so on. What's going on in the person's psyche? Is it a physical malady? Hypothalamus, thyroid, something. Different things can be going on within the physical body that can whack people out and make them do all kinds of bizarre things. What if it's something else? So it's always a matter of evaluating, looking at the whole person, presuming that there's a natural explanation, something in nature, something organic. But then what happens if there's more? Very much now the American model, and it's spread to other parts of the world, we've moved away from the model of, kind of what you see in so many of the old exorcist movies kind of thing. There's kind of one guy, the Lone Ranger riding in on the white horse kind of thing to solve all the problems. Because even if you look back at the ancient rite of exorcism, we're talking 1614, it's interesting that even there in the guidelines, in the early part of the directions, so to speak, that preface the rite of exorcism itself, it talks about knowing what else is going on in the person's life. One of the things they mention specifically, they use the word melancholia, type of depression, natural explanations, what's going on in the person's life. But you look at the whole person. So I mean, and I cannot tell you how many times, the standard call would be, hello, Father, you're not going to believe me when I tell you, but I'm possessed by the devil. Fortunately, they cannot see the cloud that appears above my head, which says, you're right, I don't believe you. And with no disrespect, but we don't go from 0 to 60. It's not like, okay, and you want to schedule your exorcism for next week, Tuesday? Okay, I can fit you in probably about 3:30. Because again, it's a matter of looking at the whole person. What are they? What is their condition physically, psychologically? What's their family history? What have they opened themselves up to possibly in some kind of dark practice? Lots of different factors. But unfortunately, in so many of the programs, so many of the shows, so many of the things we see in the, be it the media, but especially in Hollywood, it's kind of like, okay, let me grab my bag and I'll be right out kind of thing. But I mean, so much of this, and even in my comments, they're geared towards you. I mean, there's a lot of things, and I know, in a sense, you could have done a lot of other things to kill time before you get to the Halloween party that's starting at whatever time, 8 o'clock or whatever it is. You're here for a reason. And no doubt, I didn't mean to, hopefully I didn't disappoint. I always joke, I think, well, I should wear my fedora and my long top coat and black satchel and look like Lancaster Marin from the movie The Exorcist or something like that. For me, it's a matter of being practical. Being spiritually practical, because there's so much bad information out there. So much confusing, distorted information out there in a sense of how this looks, how these things happen. Do they happen? Absolutely. Have I encountered real cases of demonic possession? Yes. Are they rare? Yes. The vast majority of people, again, that I, in a sense that I see, they've opened themselves up to something. So it becomes a matter of finding what is that something. Try to respond to anybody and everybody that comes to my door. If it's a mental health issue, then I try to refer them because they came to the church in good faith. Get them the help they need, get them the support they need, get them the care, the counseling, whatever they need. What if it's something else? What if it is spiritual? Well, then let's work through it. Vast majority of people that come have lost their way. They're disoriented. They're not on track, so to speak, with the divine. Something has touched their life. Something, in a sense, is corrupting their reality. And that's usually when they seek help. Because the person that is genuinely demonically possessed doesn't come knocking at the priest's door or the exorcist's door or wherever they may go knocking. They're brought by someone else. It's this large category of people somewhere between having opened the door to something and a relationship with the darkness developing. They realize, oh crap, something is going on in my life. Something is out of kilter, something is off balance. Or bizarre things may happen. They may be experiencing various manifestations of things like temperature changing or things moving or all of those types of things. Again, what does it take us back to? Fear and isolation. Same kinds of things. What do? Get the person oriented back. Of course, all of this with their choice, with their free will. Even the person that is, if they're genuinely possessed, they still must consent. Because you can't work against a person's free will. Always, free will is the trump card. In a relationship, I can't do anything against your will spiritually because it will have no effect. The power of the creature and his or her relationship with the Creator is completely unique. So that's how it plays itself out in real time. So I spent some time talking about doorways, pattern of sin, a direct occult activity, whatever it is. Often, I mean, people say, well, you know, and it's comical, you know, like the Ouija board. There's the fascination with the Ouija board. I don't know if you know, over the last year or so, have you heard about Charming Charlie? Or not? That's the. Never mind. That's the jewelry store, isn't it? Charming Charlie's. Tell where the mind is washed. The Charlie Challenge or Charlie? Who's heard about Charlie Challenge? Oh, good. Okay, so some of you know. It went viral last year. So essentially, a person takes a piece of paper and divides it into quadrants. Yes in opposing corners, no in the opposite corners. And they take a pencil and they spin it while asking a question and calling upon their friend Charlie, the spirit Charlie, to get their answer. I mean, it's a very simplified version of a Ouija board. Most people say, yeah, that's nice. It's just a bunch of kids play. Yeah, and you should track the number of cases across this country where, especially junior high kids, all kinds of bizarre things were happening in homes, in their lives, and different kinds of things. Vast majority of people probably did it. Those who played with it, nothing went wrong. But again, we go back to the simple fact of any time I open a doorway, is that a guarantee that something's going to walk in? No. Is it a possibility? And the frequency with which I open that doorway is what's going to, in a sense, creates the pattern, creates the habit, helps to develop a relationship. So again, and I apologize too, I'm kind of speaking here in broad strokes, so to speak, but just to get a sense of practical, tangible kinds of things and how these realities are. Because then, you say, well, then what differentiates? How does the church make the determination that someone is demonically possessed? Well, again, you first start basic, practical, intake, bless you, well-being, in a sense, their history, medical, psychological, all of those kinds of things. Done all of that. They come up with no clear diagnosis. Medically, psychologically speaking, the person there's nothing going on that can be determined or diagnosed. But yet there's something more. What is the more? What does the more look like? The church has used classically 4 criteria in that more category. The first, and you may have, if you watch any of the kinds of movies and stuff like that, usually they play them out in one form or another. The first is the knowledge of languages. And when I say the knowledge of languages, it's not, like when any of us travel, at least I'm sorry, I'm projecting. When I travel and I go to a place that I don't know the language, what do? You get one of the fun little phrase books, so you ask basic, questions, like where's the bathroom and how do I order a beer? Or things like that, just to at least get me through to navigate the system. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a person who instantaneously is conversant in a language that they do not know. And when you see it happen, it's quite something. In a sense where, to be able to switch from languages and having people present as part of a team that's doing the evaluation, and a person is conversant in languages that they have no education or training in, or do not even have the capacity for, and yet modern foreign languages, ancient languages, it's quite an incredible thing. Second would be what we call occult or secret knowledge, in a sense of I walk into the room of somebody that's allegedly afflicted and they're able to reveal things about me that there's no way, even doing a Google search, calling the friends back home, whatever the case may be, that they would be able to ascertain this information. And so in a sense, also, on a spiritual plane, if God permits, the demonic is also able to reveal unconfessed sin, because sin is the domain of darkness. When sin is confessed, It's covered with the precious blood of Jesus. It's removed. But the evil one he can't read our minds. He's not God, remember. But he watches, he observes. He sees our habits, he sees our practices. He sees what we do, so to speak. So secret or hidden knowledge. The third would be extraordinary strength. I mean, it's one thing for Arnold Schwarzenegger, to bench press 250, 300 pounds, whatever in his heyday kind of thing. It's quite another for a 72-year-old woman, 5'6", skeletal build, that 5 men of robust size cannot keep seated in a chair. We're talking extraordinary things. And then finally, the aversion to the sacred, so that the person is not able to come in contact with the sacred, is not able to enter into a sacred space or receive the sacraments and all of those kinds of things. I mean, these are, in a sense, help to make that further determination to say, truly extraordinary things are going on. And some people say, well, why is the church so stringent, so stingy in using, the rite of exorcism? Because it's not, in a sense, it's all about the healing of the person, but it doesn't want a sideshow. I mean, the same kind of thing. I mean, in a sense, we help the person. If it's needed, the church makes that determination through all of these kinds of evaluations. But it's all about the restoration and the healing of the person. So, in effect, that's what's core. It's 7:30, right? I got the good Father Pat wave. And actually, I kind of went through things so quickly. There's a handout, a couple handouts that just we'll make sure you get them before you leave. Then, in a sense, cover 2 things. I mean, they do kind of the image. One is about temptation, and it's not a how-to sheet. It's basically walking you through some of the basic things I talked about in the sense of the movement towards God, the movement away from God, some of the categories. And as far as how temptation works, how the evil one works, and to keep a healthy balance. And they're going to pass them out now. And those are just simply for you to take along. I hope they're somewhat useful or maybe help you to recall some of the things we talked about. The second sheet is a best practices kind of thing. And at least I can only speak for the Catholics again, in a Catholic tradition, but I mean in other Christian traditions, some of these things should resonate as well, is in a sense for the person doing their best to live a life of grace, doing their best to live a life in relationship and oriented towards God. That's your armor, that's your protection, in a sense, because you're in right relationship with God. Again, the evil one, he's not God, he's a creature. And so he's only, like St. Augustine says, the dog's on a leash. He can only run so far, but he's on a leash. That means he still may be able to have a wide girth of running, but he can't do anything and everything he wants to. So just some perspective. I'm supposed to take Q&A, do Q&A. Yes?
Can you, I didn't think of this until earlier, but as someone who lived through it and saw this stuff, could you talk about your opinions on the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s?
Well, I mean, in a sense, there were lots of layers. The whole satanic ritual abuse stuff. I mean, there were books written about that whole era. In a sense where, at least I maybe make sure I'm going off on the right tangent, if you will. But at least that's where I'm going into that direction in the sense of, like they were talking about, even daycare centers and all kinds of different places that there was all this bizarre kinds of things going on. That kids were being offered to Satan and different kinds of things. And you've got the whole Anton LaVey piece and the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Ritual, all the different books and stuff. And I mean, it was an era, but again, too, it was because especially in some of the things I talked about, even like the case I referred to in the Father Gerald Robinson case, for some people, it crosses a line where it's just the unbelievability factor, that my word that I use, it's so beyond comprehension that somebody would do these kinds of things. And I think the reaction to that all was that. I mean, in a sense, people just couldn't, and so there was the extremes that it just simply, in some ways, some of it was bogus, and some of it was real, but just simply, in a sense, was quieted because they didn't know what to do with it. In a sense of just the whole, who worships Satan? You can go online and become a card-carrying member of the Church of Satan, and there's various branches, and there's two types of Satanism. There's an atheistic Satanism and a theistic Satanism, or personalistic and atheistic, depending on how you divide them and stuff like that. But people that believe tangibly, in a sense of, they put the evil one, Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to say, on par with God as another God, and believe as devoutly and practice as faithfully as people who believe in Jesus Christ and go to Mass or go to church or read the Bible or whatever the case may be. It's a whole discussion of that era, but what it did was it sent so much of it underground, and there's such a prevalence now more than ever, but it's not stuff that makes the news. In a sense, there's you can go to parts of the city, go up to Niles and stuff. There's places regularly where there's animal sacrifice. You can find remnants of these kinds of things happening very tangibly that people, in a sense, are hook, line, and sinker involved in. It's a big question. I don't know if I touched on any of it, but I hope.
I have a question. You talk about open doors.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, by rituals, by not knowing what they are doing because they think they are playing, they open doors.
Mm-hmm.
How to close the doors when they are not in that place anymore, but the place have that level of energy or that door open?
Are you talking about the person itself or the place?
The place.
In a sense, the church has long had the tradition of blessing. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. In the sense of when somebody has been involved in some kind of darkness or has opened a doorway to something, and not so much necessarily the person, but then what about the place itself where these things took place? We spend lots of time and have lots of priests that help, at least within Catholic tradition, of going and blessing things, blessing places. Because in a sense, that too can be remedied. There's a whole discussion that can take place about what we call infestations. So in a sense of a place, of an object, of a region, all of those different types of things. And there's corresponding prayers that go with the healing or the restoration of those places. So there are remedies for that. Yes?
Let me just first of all say it's an honor to finally meet you. I've actually read your work and known about
Thank
you
you.
for almost 15 years. It's
Okay.
really an honor.
Well, thank you.
But let me just preface, I am not a faithful person, but I am a spiritual person. And this topic has always been of a huge interest to me. I'm just curious, what would you recommend for someone such as myself who's not faithful, who's not religious, but who wants to know more about kind of the practice to fight against the darkness?
Well, even St. Thomas Aquinas talks about what they call natural virtue, natural goodness. So for the person that, in a sense, it doesn't even necessarily practice a particular faith, but yet is trying to be genuinely good. So in a sense, that's, to pursue that kind of path. Because in a sense, faith is a gift that's given to each person by God. And different people have, if in a sense, for whatever, I don't know, in a sense, I'm not on the committee that doles out the portions of faith to different people, but it's a response that each of us, in a sense, something each of us has to respond to, whatever is our gift of faith, but then to pursue it, to expand it, to seek it, whatever it is, whatever the tradition. But in a sense, you can lead an entirely good life. I think there are very, very many good and holy people, in a sense, that have led naturally good lives, practicing virtue, being good to others, living the golden rule, so to speak, that do not have a particular faith tradition. So you focus on the light. That's all. And and I guess I keep using the example, in a sense, at least for the Christian or for the Catholic. You're focused on Christ. Well, I mean, in a sense, if you're not, in a sense, at least of Christian tradition, you focus on what is the good, what is the light, what is the holy, what lifts up, as opposed to what tears down.
Sorry. So you talked about trauma and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I have an understanding that those processes of healing are very long. So as long as you're focusing on, like the light and trying to heal from those things, are you doing better? Are you doing okay as far as the battle goes?
Sure. I mean, and that's the hope, for anybody, and again, too, remember, this is not a guarantee that something is going to happen. But it certainly, hopefully, is a catalyst for people to be working towards healing. Because that's hopefully the goal for everyone. Because, and again, the tragedy that bad things happen to so many good people, and certainly not of their choosing. So, how do we help support them? Whatever the case may be, however we can do that, but so that the person is moving forward. Because there's always the danger when a person becomes entrenched. And not just on a spiritual plane. That happens. It can affect every aspect of their life. And again, we're always looking at the well-being and the healing of the whole person. And not just because we just can't, reach in and say, well, I'm just going to fix this part, just the spiritual part, and to heck with all the other parts. Because all of them are interlaced. We're the complex beings. God is the one that's infinitely simple.
Well, a couple questions in one. First of all, have you ever met Ed and Lorraine Warren, and have you ever assisted or performed an exorcism, and what was it like?
Okay. I know Lorraine Warren. I met her after Ed had already died. And so I know some people, the names, Ed and Lorraine Warren, they're the ones, a wonderful Catholic couple from the East Coast. They were the ones that, in a sense, had the actual experiences that worked with the healing of what became known as the Amityville Horror, or the Amityville House. The Conjuring movies, those are about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed died a number of years ago. Lorraine is in her 80s, but is still involved in, and it just, they have, that opens another whole discussion, another whole category of people. Each of us has unique gifts, talents. Some have very specific spiritual gifts. And this is nothing new. You can read about it in the New Testament, or even in the Old Testament, but specifically in the New Testament, different spiritual gifts. In the sense of healing, of being able to see things happen, to be able to read a person's heart, all of these types of things. What we call charismatic, or charismas. Charisms or charismatic gifts. And clearly, Lorraine is one of those people that God has blessed, and she's gone into, she could tell stories, unbelievable things, but they would always work with a team of people, an exorcist and the like. So that's Ed and Lorraine Warren. As far as exorcisms, yeah, I've been part of them, but I talk about general categories and stuff. I don't so much talk about specific cases, because it's all about in my estimation, it's all about the healing of the person. And in a sense, it's not because, even though we spent this last, hour and 15 minutes or whatever talking about the devil, I would much rather spend my life and my time talking about Jesus Christ and God than on the devil. Right now, it's my life, part of my job, that I have to focus on the darkness. I'm trying to get everybody here to focus on the good, on God, on whatever that is in your life, and not be focused on the darkness. Yeah.
Couple questions. First off, how do you, or does one become an exorcist? Did you go to school for that, or that sort of thing? And also, there's the image of exorcism that Hollywood presents, but I don't assume that that's how it is. So how is an actual exorcist performed? How does that go?
The classic way of training to be an exorcist is the apprenticeship model. I mean, there are different programs that, I mean, are available, I mean, in a sense, because again, too, you know, there's this, it's developed in, say, the last 20 years, a much more holistic approach in a sense. So, I mean, the training in not only, you know, scripture and theology and all of those types of things, but then in, you know, with, counseling, psychology, psychiatry, all those different aspects, because when you're dealing with the person, you're dealing with the whole person. And so in the programs that are developed, there's a program in Rome. Actually, there's a program that takes place locally that they use Mundelein Seminary for. It's not based out of Mundelein, they just simply use the buildings and classrooms there. So I mean, it's, you know, and it's a whole aspect of a whole formation of the person, of the priest, to be an exorcist. But again, all those different categories, everything from, you know, theology, spirituality, demonology, angelology, all of those different types of things. Picking up on the second question with regards to what happens, once you've made the determination, I mean, after going through that whole process of the evaluation of the person, starting both first organically, then moving into spiritually, and if there's a determination that's made that person is, I mean, at least there's a belief that, or proofs that the person is demonically afflicted, the rite of exorcism, and I mean, it's readily available, you can look it up online, at least the ancient version, the modern, the revised rite, which, the ancient rite was revised in 1998, but the ancient rite you can find online. It's a series of prayers. You know, and that's why I tell people too, at least, and again, I can say this specifically to Catholics, is that we have available to us at our fingertips things that are far more powerful than any exorcism. We've got the sacraments. The sacraments, we believe, come from the hand of Christ himself. He founded a church. He left for us the sacraments, the Eucharist, the anointing of the sick, forgiveness of sins, reconciliation, all those kinds of things. One good sacramental confession is more powerful than 100 exorcisms. Because look at what's taking place. The sacrament is coming from the hand of Christ himself. In the sacrament of penance, the creature stands before the Creator through the, I mean, and with the assistance of the priest confessor, and says, I need you. I've sinned. I've ruptured my relationship with you. Help me. The evil one can't touch that, because that's the creature calling out to his or her Creator. You know, and so it's, whereas whereas the rite of exorcism is what we call a sacramental, which comes through the ministry of the church. So it's not, I mean, in a sense, the sacraments come from the hand of Christ himself. The sacramentals come through the hand of the church from Christ. And so, again, the powerful nature of the sacraments, those kinds of things, that's what we try to get people, that's what brings true healing, you know, in a sense, because you look at the rite of exorcism itself, it's a series of prayers. I mean, there's a litany of saints, there's some readings from scripture, some psalms, and then a series of prayers, commanding prayers, first directed petitioning prayer to God, and then a command to the evil one. They always go in pairs. First is asking God, if you will, to prepare the way, praising God and asking God's assistance. The second prayer that it's coupled with is the command to the darkness, to the evil one. But the prayers themselves, in so many ways, are quite simple. But I mean, it's not, I mean, seldom is it ever that, you know, the rite is prayed one time through and everything is better. Because again, go back to the image of a relationship. It depends upon how deeply the relationship has developed. Even within demonic possession, there are degrees. It's not just I'm either possessed or I'm not possessed. in a sense, because even within demonic possession, there's such a thing as what they call perfect possession, which is, in a sense, where the person has aligned his or her will so closely to the darkness that it becomes very difficult to differentiate anymore. However, the person's will is still theirs. And we believe God's grace is always at work. God doesn't stop loving. God doesn't stop, giving grace to help. So at any point, if the person desires, turns, and looks at God, healing can take place. Hope that helps a little bit.
Last
Wait.
question, Jeff.
What's that?
Last question.
Okay, way back on the sofa.
How do you feel about other forms of spiritual enlightenment, like such as tarot, or other forms that aren't necessarily satanic or demonic, but are still forms of asking questions to the spiritual realm?
I always, and again, all I can do is go from my own experience, and so for me it's a word of caution. Because it always, in a sense, the basic question to ask is, who is the source of the power? Or who is supplying the knowledge? If you are unable to trace that clearly back to the divine, then someone else is supplying it. So just a word of caution to be just careful, because in a sense we can open ourselves unwittingly and innocently enough, and just simply, you can see the experiences that different people have had in a sense of using different types of things like tarot cards or, different even types of spiritual meditation, even healing postures and the like. It's always, in a sense, to be very careful to know what you're doing. Because people, this is another, in some ways maybe an extreme, but like when all the Harry Potter books, were coming out and stuff like that, there were people that, in a sense, wanted to have a book burning, and kind of want to pinpoint and say, they're all bad, they're all evil and kind of stuff. But in a sense, for the person that has a spirituality about them, is grounded in faith, you pick it up, you read the book and say, that's nice, and you put it down. But does, as you look at, study the books themselves, does the whole role of magic become more intense, and other things, within the series of writings of the collection, if you will. But in a sense, a book can be just a book too. So in a sense, so much rests with the person. Again, keep the image of I'm the one, in a sense, opening and closing the door in my life, spiritually and in every other way. But I'm talking tonight specifically spiritually. And what's coming and going, what am I allowing in, what am I allowing to stay, so forth. Thank you. Thank you for your time tonight. Sir?
Thank you to Father Grob.
Yeah.
If any of you need a private consultation,
Talk to Father Pat.